I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. You know, we have a really interesting show today. We're talking about World Wood Day.
Yeah, it's coming up next week, I believe, and we're really excited. We've got our very own Chad Nyman, who's trying to get on with us right now. Are running into a little audio issues. Hopefully we'll get that resolved and have Chad on with us shortly. We've got our great friend, our resident archaeologist, if you will, Gwen Henderson, who's here with us today. And she's going to be talking about, let's see, what was that? I'm sorry, Gwen, but it was wood use by Kentucky ancient American Indian peoples. Yeah, I think that's all of it. Yeah, so we're looking forward to. Gwen always does such a great job of really tying those historic connections of wood and how people have used wood for a long time. So always excited to have Gwen with us. And then we've got Laurie Thomas here today, actually in person, and she's also got a brand new Forestry of the Week. So really excited about, getting that one in too. So folks, glad to have you all with us. You can use the chat function to interact with us. And if you're on YouTube, welcome. Glad to have you there as well.
All right. So let's go ahead and get started. Gwen, if you want to go ahead and turn your camera on.
All righty.
Good morning. How are you?
Welcome.
Good.
Good. Welcome to the show again.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here. Always pleased to be here.
Oh, you do such a great job. We're always
in the woods today. We're from the woods, but we're in the woods today.
There we go.
There you go. So tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about.
All right. So because we're not too far away from World Wood Day, everyone, Renee asked me to come today and talk about how Indigenous people used wood. And that seems like a simple thing. And I was confident I was not going to be able to make my 20 minutes. And so I said I would talk about how archaeologists figure this stuff out. I would share about how Native peoples used wood, fuel, medicine, building materials, etc. And then I figured I would talk about how wood species profiles and wood species identification can reveal something about the human environment that Indigenous people have impacted. Well, I always learn so much in preparing for these presentations, and my head is popping off my neck about all the interesting things that I have to share. And so I'm gonna ditch the how wood species profiles and wood species identification can reveal. It might come out indirectly, but it's not going to be direct because there were just so many things I wanted to share with you all today.
All right, wonderful.
I know, I'm excited. Yes.
Yay! And get started. Looking forward to it.
All right, so let me share. How about this, people? This year, World Wood Day is Wood in Cultural Heritage. I'll tell you, these people at From the Woods Today, you cannot beat them. They are totally on the ball. Okay, so this is going to be what I'm talking about. As Billy said, wood use in as many contexts and things as I could find and confirm factually. Before I begin, I want to remind everybody about the new website, Discover Kentucky Archaeology, that has lots of information about Kentucky's archaeological sites, both Native American and European and African American. And I also wanted to tell everybody that a poster that was printed in the 1980s, and we've tried to reprint it and had some technical difficulties. It's now been reprinted, and now a colorized version is also available. The colorized version is a fundraiser for the Kentucky Organization of Professional Archaeologists. And the best way I can tell you to get a hold of them right now is to contact Corn Island Archaeology in Louisville, and they have copies of this for sale. I mean, it turned out really amazingly well, and I wanted to show you guys this. It's just so exciting. All right, so let me begin. I'm going to give you some examples from Kentucky archaeological sites about food, fuel, medicine, dyes, domestic and ritual items, domestic buildings, and ritual structures, if you can believe it. And then also, as I said, talk about how archaeologists infer this information, because as you know, there are no time machines built yet. And so the information that I'm sharing with you is based on inferences. drawn from the objects that have been found and the descriptions that archaeologists have written about what they have found at Kentucky archaeological sites. Okay, what we're talking about are wood resources, as if I needed to remind you. And so here are some of the wood that I'm going to be talking about during my presentation. Black locust, hickory, and walnut. Oak, ash, slippery elm, maple, chestnut. And why am I going to focus on some of these or discuss some of these? Well, because here is a list. This is focused specifically on Central Kentucky. These are the wood species and the nuts from those trees that archaeologists have documented from just the Fort Ancient sites, just the village farming sites in Central Kentucky. This doesn't include information from the gardening peoples who lived much earlier in time, nor does it include the wood from the hunters and gatherer people who lived even earlier. And those of you who know your woods, when you skim through this, you see all kinds of hardwoods. Only one pine group, and part of that has to do with the ability to distinguish between different pine species. So understand that this is seen through a lens of archaeological sites, but also through the lens of preservation and cultural choice. Okay, how do we infer ancient use by Native peoples? Well, there's a number of ways. And one of the best ones is flotation. I don't know if you've heard about this particular way of data collection, but the easiest thing to say it's washing dirt and collecting all the fragments, everything from the dirt. You see a flotation tank there in the upper left-hand corner. And what that flotation produces as heavy fraction and light fraction on the bottom right. We find the charred fragments of nut shell and wood species in flotation. But in some cases where sites are good preservation, you also find charred nutshell and wood charcoal in the screens. So there's two different ways that we recover this. And it has to do with the fact that, and this is an archaeobotanist has explained to me how he can tell under a microscope from what you see on the bottom right-hand side, that the different hardwoods have different clear differences in the way they look. Not only unburned, but also as burned. He knows those different signatures, and he can therefore identify species from tiny pieces of wood because of these signature features that the wood expresses. Okay, so let me move on to some examples. Okay, the classic ones, the standard ones, the no-duh ones are fuel. Native peoples used wood for fuel, for heat, for light, to cook food. My examples here, hickory nuts and black walnuts. Not only the nut meats, but also nut oil. Native peoples would boil the nut meats, sometimes without the nut shells, sometimes with the nut shells, just crack them and throw them into boiling water. The shells would fall to the bottom. The nut meats and the oils would float to the top. They would skim off the oils and use this very nutritious food. Then there's medicinal use. Holy smokes, you guys. I started doing some research on this and I was completely blown away. My take on this from ethnobotanical research that others have done, wood is used, the inner bark, the roots of the trees, the leaves, the twigs, for a host of things. And you can see some examples here. So, for example, the Kentucky coffee tree root powdered and mixed with water is for hemorrhaging, to stop hemorrhaging. Leaves of ash are, let me see, I've got my notes here. Leaves from ash are for snake bites, for a poultice for snake bites. Black gum, you use the twigs and bark to relieve chest pains. Slippery elm is an amazing plant. You use it for not only construction materials, as I'll tell you later, but the bark and leaves for toothache, respiratory problems, skin conditions, stomach ache, sore throats. And one that I really want to share with you that has a significant cultural meaning is the leaves from the American holly. When you boil those, they create a high caffeine content drink called the black drink. And this was a particularly significant ritual drink that indigenous people in Western Kentucky would have drunk during ceremonies. Just enormous diversity of uses for medicinal purposes for trees. Then there's dyeing. You can see two examples here. The colors that you get from black locust and the colors that you get from black walnut shells. Native peoples made their own fabrics from fibers of plants and some inner bark of trees. And they would dye these yarns and then weave them without looms into beautiful fabrics. I want you then, if you take nothing away from this presentation, think of indigenous life as very colorful because of, in some cases, the dyes available to make those yarns into different colors from the trees that grew around their houses and their communities. Here's examples of domestic items. Some of these are examples that are replicas. Most of these examples are replicas. Two of them are actual ones. Some of these are not from Kentucky. Let me share. The wooden bowl or dish that you see there was recovered from Mammoth Cave. Wood preservation, that's something not charred, requires special preservation environments like the cold caves and the dry rock shelters in Eastern Kentucky and places in Western Kentucky too. So what you see there is a fragment of a wooden bowl or dish from Mammoth Cave. The other examples are, okay, the chipped stone hoe with the wooden handle, that's a replica. But the one with the stone embedded it, the axe, that is a real ancient artifact. It's not something that's from Kentucky, but these kinds of things Native peoples would have used in Kentucky. The same with the digging stick. The wooden cradle board, let me find my information here so that I can be very specific here. Okay, a cradle board was found in the dry rock shelters of Menifee County, rough hewn with stone tools. The holes were still there, which would have been bored with stone drills for the attachment of thongs or cords. This example is not from Kentucky. This is an example from the Puebloan sites of the Southwest. I couldn't find a good picture of a wooden cradle board from Kentucky, but this gives you a sense of what it would have looked like and how the wood served as the source for this important domestic object. Other examples for weapons. I have two different kinds here. The atlatl or spear thrower, the earlier, and the bow and arrow, which came into Kentucky around the late 800s, 900s AD. Elements of wood in these two weapon systems included not only the shafts for the spear or the shaft for the arrow, but also for the atlatl itself, the spear thrower itself. as well as the bow. Different kinds of woods with different kinds of elasticity and I don't know, I guess you'd call it boinginess, that would provide the flexibility needed for these tools as weapons. Then there are ritual items. This carved wooden human figurine was recovered from a rock shelter in Bell County, Kentucky in the 1800s. This copper knife, the wooden part is the handle there. The handle is made from wood. This object was found in Fayette County. This is a stand-in for a dendroglyph. This is a dendroglyph from a site in West Virginia. This was a surprise to me years ago. I had heard that Paintsville was called Paintsville because tree bark had been pulled away in selected areas on trees, and indigenous people had used either red or black paint to paint symbols on the trees. Okay, I had heard about that. But the dendroglyphs, there were dendroglyphs. So we have rock art in Kentucky, which is pecked into the stone. We have pictographs, which is painted on the stone, but also painted on the trees, and also dendroglyphs on the trees. So part of the reason why we in Kentucky don't see the same kinds of amazing rock art that we see if you've ever gone to the Southwest is partially because the preservation environment here in the East doesn't permit the preservation of things like the trees. Domestic building construction. Here are examples of different layouts of native villages, one from 1350, the other 1500, and the hunting camp, the contemporary with the native village. But you see the use of wood in all of these contexts through time and different types of settlements. Here's a zoom in. These buildings are made, they're called bent pole construction. That's the technology, that's the engineering of it. And you can see what we see as archaeologists above the two different sizes of structures. Every single one of those little dots is where a post stood. And some of these houses were reconstructed. So they're pulling the posts out and moving the house over just a little and putting posts back in. That's a lot of wood of a certain kind, of a certain diameter. Then the houses are covered with bark, and based on the ethnographic and ethnohistoric information from Native peoples who are historically linked to the folks who lived in these houses in ancient times, we know that they used slippery elm bark for the coverings for their houses. We also know, based on the research that we've done at these sites, that they prefer black locust in their house construction for the poles, for the posts in their houses. Those of you who know your woods are not surprised by this at all, because black locust is a very hard, resistant to decay wood. In fact, it is my understanding that if you ask a farmer today about what kind of wood they prefer to have for their posts, for their fences, it's black locust. How do we know that it's black locust? Well, each one of those little dots is where a post stood, and an archaeologist excavated that post and recovered the soil from where those posts stood. And then the archaeobotanist analyzed it and found that there was a preference for black locust in house construction. And there's even more, because, again, those of you who know your trees know that black locust is one of the species that will come back after the land has been disturbed, among the first. Indigenous farming peoples would have disturbed the land in their farming practices. And so as their fallow fields were being restored into woodland lots, which then they would burn and again plant later. Black locust was among the first species to come back. So it's a real synergistic kind of situation there between the farmers and the wood. Here's another example of a site in Warren County. This is a photograph of the footprint of a rebuilt and enlarged house. On the floor of this house were found burned hickory rods and white oak strips. The folks who lived in Warren County in Western Kentucky and also in extreme Southern Kentucky, their houses were not of bent pole construction. It's a different kind of technology. They were wattle and daub houses. The wattle is interwoven strips of wood that create a lattice work for the daub or the clay that's placed on to make the walls, and then the walls are whitewashed. So here is the archaeological evidence of the use of hickory and white oak as part of the wattle for a house, an ancient house. This house probably burned down in the late 1300s AD. Ritual structures. The Adena people who lived in central Kentucky, either side, about 200 years either side of the time of Christ, built burial mounds. What you see is an artist's reconstruction of a log tomb that was investigated in a mound in Montgomery County. Let me pull out my information on that. Okay, let me find it here. Okay. Not okay. I guess I'll just, here it is. All right. During the excavation, they found some of these logs were smooth. They inferred that they were dead trees that were used. Others had the bark still on them. In some cases, the logs were so pressed into the clay soil that they brought in for the tomb's exterior sides that a biologist could identify that in some tombs they used hackberry for the wood that lined or faced this tomb. These log boxes or log platforms in these mounds. But it wasn't just the log for the walls. Strips of bark or slabs of bark were placed on the floor of the structure and also covered the person. The reason why the person isn't covered in this slide is you wouldn't see the person if we covered them. But rest assured that the bark would have covered the entire person just as it covers the floor of the tomb. And let's notice too, wooden poles and wooden bark covering of this shelter or structure that was erected over the person prior to the mound being built over top. I need to also mention that sacred circles had structures on them, and the mounds sometimes had structures below them. These ritual structures, circular, paired posts, paired wooden posts. And then the image that you see on the right is a sacred pole in the center of a circular village. We haven't found any examples of this in Kentucky, but there are examples of this in Ohio and also in Indiana. I don't know what kind of wood these poles are, but engineering folks examined the deepness of the pits that these posts were placed in. And these are big, tall posts. Let's not forget too about the wood hinges, the solar calendar. Several of them were built at Cahokia Mounds outside of St. Louis. So the significance of wood as a as a ritual source, a source for ritual structures, is also significant for these folks. Now, let's take a look at this picture with me and see all the different kinds of wood that you see there and how it's used. You've got circular homes with logs or branches or saplings covering the mats that cover these houses. But you can see interlaced the palisade that surrounds the village. That's wood. Notice the woman who's making pottery. She has a wooden mallet, which is covered with or has string or cordage, could have been made of inner bark fibers of trees, as she makes the designs on the pot that she's making. You can see the wooden bow in the foreground and a wooden bowl, the wooden shaft of the arrow. And then the woman who is making, standing there and weaving, you can see how the trees, the forked tree has created a stand, a loom, if you will, for the woman who's making textiles for her family. All those different kinds of wood being used. We also have fuel there in the center, and likely there are elements of medicinal plants and so forth inside the houses that we can't see, that people would use when ailments arose. So, wood use by Kentucky's ancient Native American or ancient American Indian peoples for Wood Day 2023. Diverse, functional, artistic, symbolic, essential. I have said in the past in other presentations that Native peoples was surrounded by a Kroger. Their food surrounded them. But after having prepared this presentation for you all, it's also a Home Depot. All around them, the wood is there for them to use in multiple ways. It's also a pharmacy because the woods are used for medicine. It's amazing, it's fascinating, and thank you very much.
Gwen, awesome.
Yeah, Dr. Henderson, as always, you did a great job, and we've always said here that trees are the answer, and you just really confirmed that for us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, great presentation. We really appreciate it. I've always been curious about this information, and that's kind of what we discussed, and I really appreciate you diving into it and finding out all the information for us.
It was fun. It was fun. I learned so much. Thanks so much, you guys.
Well, yes. Thank you. And from our viewers, thank you so much. Yes, always a treat to have our resident archaeologist, Dr. Henderson, here with us.
I'm sure she'll be on yet again.
Yes, I know. I can't wait till next time. So yeah, be looking. By the way. Oh, that was great. Really good. Now we got a new tree of the week. Really excited to have Mari with us. Yay.
Yeah. And I just want to say, Gwen, that was wonderful. I learned so much, and and I'm in forestry, so this is awesome to make that connection. I talk about uses in most of these videos, and to see how far back those uses go, it's just wonderful. Love it, and I love the likeness. It's a Home Depot, it's a pharmacy. It's totally true.
Exactly, it's awesome.
That's great.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, good stuff.
Lori, what are you going to talk about today?
All right, so we're closing down on the oaks. I'm trying to wrap up all of our oaks. We got 20 plus species we find here here in the state. So today I chose swamp chestnut oak, and it is more of our western species. It's we find it thus around swamps, so we're going to find it more in the western part of the state, and it's a southern species too. But it's a very important species. It's important as a wildlife food. It was important as a food before. I mean, peoples ate the food as well, but it's also an important timber tree and had other important uses in our past history as well. So here is swamp chestnut oak.
Excellent. Thank you.
I'm Laurie Thomas with the University of Kentucky Forestry and Natural Resources Extension, and I'm here with the tree of the week, the swamp chestnut oak. Swamp chestnut oak, Quercus machoii, is one of 20 plus oaks native to Kentucky. The oak genus Quercus is considered one of the most important aggregations of hardwoods in North America. Swamp chestnut oak is a member of the white oak group and one of the more important species in this group in the South. It is also known as basket oak and cow oak. Swamp chestnut oak typically has a straight, massive trunk with a narrow crown, and trees can average 60 to 80 feet in height and up to 2 to 3 feet in diameter, and they are somewhat slow growing. The wood is considered second only to that of the best white oaks, and it is a valuable wildlife tree. Swamp chestnut oak grows from the Atlantic coastal plain from New Jersey, south to Florida, and west to Texas. It is also found in the Mississippi River Valley up into Tennessee and Kentucky. In Kentucky, it's found along the Mississippi and western Ohio rivers and the far western part of the state. There are also scattered populations in the southern half of the state. Swamp chestnut oak grows on moist and wet loamy soils of bottomlands along swamp borders and streams. It grows with cherry bark, shumard, and white oak, as well as blackgum and other bottomland hardwoods. This oak can be used in large urban settings such as a large yard or park, and they make a great shade tree. Swamp chestnut oak is classed as intermediate to shade intolerant. Swamp chestnut oak is a deciduous tree with simple, alternately arranged leaves, as you can see in the photo. The leaves are obovate, 4 to 8 inches long and 3 to 5 inches wide. The margins have large, round, blunt teeth, and they are dark green and somewhat shiny above and pale green and downy below. And fall leaf color ranges from yellow to orange to burgundy to a coppery brown. This species is monoecious, meaning one house, which means trees have both male and female flowers. The male flowers are in 2 to 4 inch long yellow-green catkins, and the female flowers are green to red, and they're very small, and they're found in the leaf axil. The flowers appear with the leaves in mid-spring, and the flowers are wind-pollinated. The fruit is an acorn, and the acorn is typically 1 to 1.5 inches long with a bowl-shaped cap that covers about a third of the acorn. The acorn cap is rough and scaly and has a short stalk. The acorns tend to be chestnut brown when they're ripened, and they may be found solitary or in pairs. Trees begin seed production around 20 to 25 years, with optimum seed production around 40 years of age. Trees have good seed crops every 3 to 5 years, and acorns mature in one growing season. The seeds are dispersed by wildlife, wind, gravity, and water. And squirrels are very helpful at disseminating the acorns because they tend to hoard far more than they actually eat. Swamp chestnut oak can also sprout from roots and stumps, but not prolifically. The bark of swamp chestnut oak is very similar to white oak. It's gray and scaly, kind of ashy in color, and it develops irregular furrows as the tree grows larger. The bark can sometimes have a red tinge, and freshly cut surfaces are reddish brown. The wood of swamp chestnut oak shares many of the same traits of white oak, Quercus alba, and is often sold as white oak. The wood is hard and durable, and it tends to be light to medium brown in color, but there is also a great variation in that color. It has medium to large pores and is ring porous with abundant tyloses in the large pores, as you can see in the close-up photo. Tyloses are balloon-like outgrowths of parenchyma cells in the large xylem vessels, and they block water movement, which helps white oak's wood to be watertight, which is why it's preferred for casks and shipbuilding to red oak. It does have distinct growth rings, and the wood is rated moderately durable and moderately resistant to decay. The wood is used for cabinetry, furniture, interior trim, flooring, barrels, veneer, railroad ties, and baskets. Swamp chestnut oak, like other oaks, is an important wildlife tree. In fact, the National Wildlife Federation lists oaks as one of the top 10 trees for wildlife. The large, sweet, nutritious acorns provide food for a variety of birds, such as woodpeckers, blue jays, ruffed grouse, ducks, and wild turkey, as well as numerous mammals including squirrels, white-tailed deer, and black bear. Oaks are also a very important larval host for hundreds of lepidopteran species, such as the imperial moth, hair streaks, and dusky wings. Swamp white oak also provides good cover for a variety of mammals as well, because the leaves typically persist longer than other plant associates. The national champion swamp chestnut oak as of 2022 is in Virginia Beach, Virginia. It's 276 inches in circumference, 123 feet tall, with a 109-foot crown spread. The Kentucky champion is in Jefferson County, and it's 254 inches in circumference, 125 feet tall, with a 116-foot crown spread. If you'd like to know more about champion trees, check out American Forest National Champion Trees or check out the Kentucky Division of Forestry Champion Trees. Now for a few fun facts about swamp chestnut oak. This tree is also known as basket oak because it was once widely used to make baskets. The wood is easily split into long, thin, flexible strips that were excellent for weaving baskets. Another common name is cow oak because in the South, cattle were commonly turned out into the woods to graze, and they ate the swamp chestnut oak foliage as well as the acorns. The scientific genus name Quercus is Latin for oak, and the specific epithet Michauii is for the French botanist François-André Michaux, who was responsible for first describing many of the trees in the eastern United States in the early 1800s. I hope you get the opportunity to get out into your woodlands, a local park, or neighborhood and enjoy the beautiful trees of Kentucky, including the swamp chestnut oak.
Well, thank you, Lori. We greatly appreciate that. And so now there is a swamp chestnut oak, and then there's a chestnut oak. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
All right. So-
And an American chestnut, so.
Right. And a swamp white oak, and so.
oh my God. Okay, stop.
We got a lot of trees,
I
right?
know.
Oh, does it look similar to chestnut oak?
Its leaves look similar. Its bark does not at all. If you all if you remember, I'm sure you do, because I think we did it 2 years ago. Chestnut oak is, and we find chestnut oak more in the eastern half of the state. It's more of a more of a mountainous, sandy, acidic type soils that we have more in the eastern half of the state. And it has very deep furrows in its bark, like, I mean, super deep. You can put like a lens cap in there. It's so deep, deeply furrowed, whereas our swamp chestnut oak has bark that looks very much like white oak. It's kind of scruffy, and it maybe breaks into some irregular furrows, but for the most part, it's much flakier and scruffier looking like our white oak. So, but the leaves do look similar, and they call it chestnut oak because the leaves kind of resemble, for our chestnut oak and swamp chestnut oak, kind of resemble an American chestnut leaf. Kind of, not exactly, but do kind of resemble them.
Okay. All right. Let's see.
See, DJ has a question. Swamp white oak
Oh, that's good.
acorns come off the stem on a stalk, kind of like a cherry. Easy way to idea. Good tip. Thank you, DJ.
Yeah, the DJ dropping his forestry skills.
Yes, exactly.
Love it. Love it. Yes.
All right, Lori, thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to having more Tree of the Weeks.
I know.
All
Good
right.
stuff.
I
Good
know
stuff. Thank you,
we're
Lori.
up to like 84, I think. So
Wow,
I
man.
know.
You know, so
Close.
another year, I'm gonna you'll be done.
There you go. All right,
Thank you. Thank
Thanks.
you very much.
All right, now to talk more about World Wood Day, Chad Nyman is going to be on here. There he is. Hi, Chad. How are you?
I'm doing well, Renee and Billy. Can you
Wonderful.
all hear me?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
sir. Got you.
Excellent.
Got you. Yep. It sounds
The
good.
last test, we did not have any of the visual, which would be okay.
Well,
Everything's working now.
great. Hi. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you all.
So go ahead.
So,
and,
Doc, oh, go ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead and tell us what you're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so Dr. Henderson really set a great foundation talking about early uses of wood and the interactions with people and those forests and wood. And so I'm going to try to build upon that with some more modern uses. And so when I say modern, the last 300 years. And so, so I'm going to jump right into that PowerPoint
Sounds
and go
good.
ahead and pull it up. And so, yes, wood is incredibly important as a material. And we have this huge history of using wood. And so it continues to be a very important part of our daily lives. And so we're going to talk a little bit about, what wood is generally. We know, it's an organic material, and we know that it's carbon based. So roughly 50% dry weight is carbon. And we know that it's a composite of cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. The lignin is kind of the glue that holds the cellulose and hemicellulose together. And we know that it's also the structural tissue of these trees. And so we think about forest management and wood. We know that wood is one of our oldest and most sustainable building materials when it's paired with sustainable forest management. And we know that technology is advancing very rapidly and that innovation, including mass timber building components, are improving the health and the sustainability of spaces where we live, work, learn, and recreate. So thinking about this presentation, I got thinking about a center that the University of Kentucky has located in East Kentucky in Breathitt County, and that is the Wood Utilization Center. And so this place opened in 1963, and it opened to provide technical training to support development of wood processing and manufacturing in East Kentucky. And so if we think back to the clear cutting of East Kentucky back in the early 1900s, and we think about those forests that were regrowing, they were becoming relatively mature in the 60s. And the timber that grew back was very high quality, and it was growing under intense competition to be able to get that quality. But one thing that was happening was it was leaving East Kentucky by rail car without much local processing occurring. And so we can see this facility here in this bottom picture. It shows the full view. This is located on the Robinson Center for Appalachian Resource Sustainability, which is the research station the university has in eastern Kentucky. Princeton is the research station in the western side of the state. And so this station today, it serves as a working laboratory to support wood drying and manufacturing, but as well as teaching and extension activities. It serves somewhat as a community center. And so some of the activities within this 14,000 square foot glulam beam supported laboratory are some workshops for family consumer science groups that are within county extension offices all across the state. So this wood manufacturing laboratory and innovation training center has classroom and meeting space in there. And so it serves as a center for wood manufacturing, and it helps to create forest and wood advocates in communities around the state and beyond. But that's really just the tip of the history of wood manufacturing in this part of eastern Kentucky. And so we think back to how the university came to acquire this property in Robinson Forest, and there's a deep history there. So the world's largest sawmill was actually located on this same bottom where the Wood Center is located today, and that occurred between 1914 until about 1920. And so this was the location where all of those logs were sawed up into lumber from the large-scale clear cutting that occurred in eastern Kentucky due to the railroad line reaching that part of the world. And we knew that the timber that was there was high quality, and so they wanted to be able to use this Robinson Center to help recover some of that value. And so we think even further back into time, and we think of the first industrial revolution. And so we think, between 1770 roughly to 1840, this started in Great Britain, and it was the beginnings of mechanized production and modern manufacturing. and it focused heavily on the use of water and steam. And then we entered the second industrial revolution between about 1870 to 1914. And we think about electricity, power, and mass production were the driving forces of that second industrial revolution. Steel was a major component of this second industrial revolution. And then we get into the third industrial revolution, and that occurred roughly between 1968 to 2010. And so we think about electronics and information technology, computers, communication technology. It's really the beginning of the digital age, automated production, and concepts like green energy. And so we look at this long history that humanity has with using wood and manufacturing, and we are currently in what is called the fourth industrial revolution. And so we know that there are these primitive beginnings with using wood and how that has progressed into our current technology age. And so we know that different species of wood have different characteristics and uses. And we know that humans are using wood more responsibly and efficiently than ever before due to the availability of technology. And so we can go back and look into some of these early manufactured products. And so charcoal is allegedly humanity's first manufactured product. And so we think of how it's still used today and the relevance that it has in our society as a way to cook food. And so we know in this modern world that we're living in that these products are made from residues left over from lumber production. And we know that the technology available to cook with charcoal or with wood has advanced rapidly. If you go and try to purchase a barbecue grill nowadays, there is a lot of options and a lot of varying degrees of technology available. And so we can think back to broad concept of the history of barrels. And so we know that barrels have been used to store all kinds of materials throughout time. And they're great for transportation and storage of goods. And we know that barrels made to hold liquids are referred to as tight cooperage. And we know that there's been thousands of years of use of barrels with tight cooperage throughout time. But it's still very relevant today, and the equipment and technology integrated with humans that are making these barrels, these folks that make barrels are called coopers, and it's a thriving business in Kentucky and throughout the world. And there's a lot of secondary markets for these barrels after they've been used. And so just this continuous progression of technology has allowed them to be made better, more efficiently, and get more barrels out of the same amount of lumber, if you will, from logs, being able to saw that wood thinner and being able to control the conditions that those barrels are made in. And so we can think of another success story as we think about the transition from circle sawmills to thin kerf bandsaws. So you think of the old circle mill saw blade, and those were thick steel and had a bit of wobble to them, and so they would take more wood and turn it into sawdust. And we call that term kerf. That's the term we use to describe the thickness of the cut when we're sawing individual boards. And so we know the thin kerf bandsaw blades originated sometime in the early 1970s. And sawmill owners and operators quickly discovered that they can recover additional boards and less sawdust made throughout their lumber production. And so we know that there are markets nowadays for sawdust, but we know that lumber is more valuable than sawdust. And so there's a better economic return by getting more boards out of that log and less sawdust. We think about humanity's need to understand wood and forests more than ever. So the use of natural products, we can reduce impact, and we really have to put forest health first because we know that it pays long-term dividends. And that's where it's excellent to see the support for forest health programming. We're fortunate to have Dr. Crocker and the folks at Kentucky Division of Forestry here in Kentucky that are focusing on emerging forest health issues and helping to convey science-based information to folks about how to manage forests and work to maintain forest health. We also know that there is this ability to store carbon within these trees, which has a lot of relevance as we think about changing climates and how to mitigate those impacts. And there is a component of that that is embedded in long-lived wood products. So wood products with a long lifespan are able to store that carbon at the full extent of their use and life as a wood product. And so there's a great story in that. If we manage our forests well and we manufacture long-lived wood products, that we can store a lot of carbon to mitigate. And so thinking very broad now, we scan out to our entire universe and we think about how the rarity of wood, it's one of our most abundant resources on the planet Earth. But when we look outside of our planet, we know that wood is far more rare than diamonds even, and any other scarce materials that are out there. And we know this through extensive technology, our International Space Station, and all of the technology we have available today to be able to search within and beyond our galaxy. And we really understand this living trees undergoing photosynthesis, this cell division and growth of new wood, how rare that is, and this ability to store carbon through that process in dense wood material, and why that is a good thing. And we have to remain very vigilant in understanding the importance of where this wood is coming from. It doesn't happen overnight. It's growing all the time in these trees, it's slowly over time. And so knowing where this wood is coming from, appreciating that, understanding that forests are dynamic ecosystems and their succession is driven by disturbance, different activities going on in those woods that disturb that balance of those trees. And so by managing forests and woodlands for succession, we can alter and drive some of that succession and be able to maintain those forests for the long haul. And so we have to understand those threats to forest trees and ecosystem function to be able to do that over the long term. And so we think about the importance of stewardship, understanding this long history of human interaction with and connectivity to the forest, and this appreciation for anthropogenic impacts both historically and currently. And there is, the need to remain engaged with our forests as we are influencing them all the time. And so thinking about technology advancements as we are entering this new industrial revolution that's really being driven by technology and how we adapt to that technology. And so we know this growth and development are moving at an incredible pace, an exponential rate, the discovery of technology in this time that we all are alive. And so we know that we're able to work with wood in ways that we previously were not able to. And optimization equipment and technology paired with skilled employees allows us to manufacture wood products more efficiently than ever before. And so part of that is scanning and optimization technology. And we know that these types of technology are very visual. They've got a human computer interface where the operator is able to make decisions and interact with that computer and equipment to be able to make optimized material processing decisions. And we know that there is this fine grain ability to measure and determine how that material will be processed later, which allows for better wood yield and recovery outcomes. Robotics are another avenue that have been developing rapidly. And so within a manufacturing setting, these can take the heavy lifting or some of the more injury-prone jobs out of the equation completely with reliable and consistent robotics. And so we're seeing this equipment have a high rate of return for industries that are making investments in this type of technology. And so we know that we can increase morale and possibly even improve pay and economics for other positions in the manufacturing facility with this type of equipment being engaged in that manufacturing process, and reducing turnover from the positions that folks avoid, if you will. And so going further with that technology and wood, we can think about wooden structures and the finishes that we're putting into those structures. And again, we'll mention this concept of long-lived wood products. And we know that wood is an insulative material. And so there's this ability to reduce heating and cooling of buildings. We know that wood is able to reduce urban heat sink, that higher temperature in cities due to all of those reflective surfaces. And we know that wood does not reflect those. It's not a reflective surface. And so we know that we can be able to reduce that urban heat sink, as well as reduce initial and long-term environmental impacts from construction compared with other materials. We know that materials like concrete and steel are always going to be very important to construction, but we can use them in the most critical locations and offset a lot of the impact with wood, as we know that wood is a renewable material. So this concept of mass timber is somewhat of a recent term, but there is a lot of historical precedents. And so we think of all of the types of examples, post and beam construction and timber frame construction. There's this long precedence of different types of timber construction out there. And so barns and warehouses and cabins come to mind readily. And this development with mass timber and products like cross-laminated timber and glue lam is something that you all might have heard of before. That's been around for quite a while now. And so using adhesives and these technology advancements, these new mass timber products are being able to be developed. And we know that there's all of these benefits to these wood structures with strength, stability, the biophilic properties, with us being connected to nature, the fact that it is an insulative material, that long-term carbon storage, and the fact that it is a renewable material. And so looking at a cross-laminated timber structure with cross-laminated timber panels here, Woodworks is an organization funded by the Forest Service and the Softwood Lumber Board that promotes science and technology advancements in mass timber. And so they have a lot of great resources if you want to learn more about that technology. And we know that this technology has advanced throughout Europe over the last 20 plus years. It's still a relatively new technology in the US, as we've just got it adopted into the International Building Code back in 2015. And we know that this is an incredibly strong material, and we have that ability to store enormous amounts of carbon in those panels and other wood components. When we think about all of the technology that's available, there's a lot of different materials that we're working with at the nanoscale, and nanocellulose is one of those types of materials that is being explored. And so when we're talking at the nanoscale, we're at 1,000 times smaller than the microscopic level. And so these are very small particles. And these products that can be made from nanocellulose and applications that are developing are quite fascinating. I've seen it being used as an extender and strengthener in concrete, and I've seen it used in lubricant products, and there's microfibrils. They say that there is many different uses for like device screens and other things that are coming online and still being tested. And so we're really just on the beginning of understanding uses for wood pulp at this nano scale or other types of cellulose. Now, when we think about the extension, extending the life of wood, there are many options that are available out there, and work is being done to come up with more natural and long-term preservation techniques that are, have reduced impact on environment. And so we know pressure treating of wood has been around for some time, and that there is great benefits to using that in an exterior environment, especially one where that wood will be in direct contact with the soil, to be able to prevent it from being destroyed by different sources. And so other things that have been around for some time are borates. They are very safe to use. And so those types of products have been used for some time in industry, and they continue to be used for their safe use and the ability to protect that wood. Something that is relatively new is thermal modification of wood. This image here is of some American ash that has been thermally modified, and that changes the structure to reduce the ability of moisture reabsorbing into that wood, which is a really fascinating concept, which makes it better for outdoor exterior environments. So there's many different reasons why we use wood or why we would want to use wood. And the largest one that comes to mind for me is to be able to manage forests and implement this controlled disturbance and succession in our forests. We also know that we need to make products out of something, and the material that we source to be able to use can help us to reduce impact. And we know that there are many benefits of wood that help us to reduce some of that impact. One of the largest ones is the renewability, the fact that these trees grow back out there in the woods, and the fact that as long as we manage the health of those woods, we can continue to be able to regenerate those trees. That's what we're talking about with renewable. With reusable, wood can be used many times. It can be reclaimed from old structures or old uses and put to use again, which is a form of recycling and a great concept and great use for wood. It really tells a great story about the long lifespan of wood and the many different ways we can use it. We know that it's natural and that it has these biophilic properties, the grain of that wood and the connection that we get to nature from being around that and smelling it in a structure that is made of wood. We know that there's high tensile strength properties for wood, and we know this carbon storage potential is really incredible. But then we think about the insulative properties of wood. It's a natural insulator. And we know with a building that it has the ability to dampen sound and absorb sound. But it also has these properties where in musical instruments that it can create a tone. There is that beauty which ties back to biophilic properties and the ability to have enhanced energy efficiency in structures with wood, and so much more. That is all that I have got today.
Thanks, Chad. We greatly appreciate that. You know, that it just gave you different viewpoints, I guess, of wood. Because like I never thought about wood's not on other planets. That never dawned on me. And I guess Billy's trees are the answer. I guess he's right on that. So it just, it surprised me, and even though I knew it, I never really thought about it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Renee.
I was going to comment the same thing. I did enjoy that too. And I appreciate your comments on stewardship. We'll remind all our viewers out there, if you are a woodland owner, there's people out there that want to help you take care of your wood. So make sure you connect with those folks, whether it's the Kentucky Division Forestry or consultant foresters or folks from NRCS or Fish and Wildlife. There's a lot of professionals out there that want to help you all get the most out of your wood. So take advantage of that so we can have all these cool products that Chad and others are working on.
Right, definitely. Well, thank you, Chad. We greatly appreciated your presentation today.
Yes.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you, Billy.
Yeah, good stuff, man. Thank you.
Well, Billy, and I told you it was going to be another
it was
great
good.
show.
It was good stuff, man. We've learned so much about wood and its use throughout time and the future. It looks just as bright, I think, as the past with the wood and its use. So it's exciting to hear some of that stuff, and certainly learned about the new the swamp chestnut oak. That was cool too. So yeah, a great episode. Thank y'all for being with us today.
Yeah, we always appreciate, everybody coming in. And, if you have any suggestions for us whatsoever, you can go to fromthewoodstoday.com. We get suggestions all the time. And, and I'm following up on those and trying to actually get those on our shows. So if you have any suggestions, please let us know.
That's right. We want to be responsive to our viewers, and we want to try to promote and the care and appreciation for our woods and wildlife and other natural resources here in Kentucky. So anything that's in those lines, let us know, and we'll try to get it covered.
Definitely. And next week we're talking about white oak again. So so make sure to join us for that. But until then, we will see you next week. Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
From the woods today.